We're going to delve deeper into object orientation today. So we've used various classes when we've been writing our programs. So we've used a string class. We know that when we create a string, we can do things like find out the character at a particular position. And we've used other classes like the scanner and the decimal format class. But we haven't really created any classes of our own. And sometimes we might want to represent a thing in our code, and the thing is very vague. And the programming term for a thing is an object. Okay, it might represent a real world object. It might represent a real world concept. Okay, so today we're going to take the idea of a module of study. Okay, so on the university course we have a module of study, and there are certain properties of that module of study. We've got, for example, a code for the module. We've got a title. We've got a number of credits. We've got the level that it sits at. So with all those things in mind, we might, rather than, for example, trying to store all different variables all over the place, we might create one object that represents all of those things. Okay, so typically we might call it a module. And the class itself is the blueprint for a module. So we define all those things that make a module what it is, but we don't say what they are. So we have the idea of a module code, but when we're defining the class itself, the blueprint, we don't say what that module code is. Okay, so let's have a start and look at how we might do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, rather than starting to write code in my main method, is I'm going to right click on the package. I'm going to choose new, and I'm going to choose new Java class. Okay, you can also use the file option on the menu. Just make sure that the package is selected. So I'm going to call it module. Okay, and I'm going to make sure class is selected. I'm going to click on it and hit enter or double click. And it will give me some code. We've got the package code like we had before, and then it puts public class module. So public just means we can access it from wherever else we like, which is fine. The key thing is you've got the keyword class and then the name of the class. Okay. So the first thing to do is to start thinking about, well, what it is that makes up the class. Okay, and we declare these as variables in our code, but we don't give them values at this stage. And in fact, we don't normally put the values in here at all. So what are the things we've talked about? Well, we know that we have a module code. Okay, so the module code kind of put it into comments. Now that might take the format something like this. Okay, we don't know the exact format, but we know it's normally 2 letters, 4 numbers. Okay, so in reality we want to represent that as a string. Okay, so it's going to be a string. We've got a module title. Okay, so that might look like something like this, programming 1, so that's also a string. I don't want to put equal string, that just confuses things a little bit. We might have the number of credits. Okay, so these tend to be in multiples of 10, and typically a module is 20 credits. So we'll put typical 20, common though to have 10 or 40. Okay, but theoretically any multiple of 5. Okay, and then we might also want to know the level of a module. Okay, but actually at Chester the level of the module is actually part of the module code. We have a prefix which represents the area of study, and then the 3rd digit is a 4 for a level 4 module, a 5 for a level 5 module, 6 for level 6, 7 for level 7. So we can calculate that. Okay, so we won't bother having anything to represent this because we can figure it out. But what we do need to do is to declare variables for each of these. So we could say string module code. But as I say, this is just a blueprint. So modules can have all different codes. So we're not going to worry about what the detail of that code is. We're just going to say that we're going to use a string for it. We've got a title. So we can say string title. And the other thing, what I've done here is I've written module code, and I could write module title, but because the class is a module, we can probably get away with just writing code. Okay, and then we've got the number of credits. Okay, the next thing we need to know about classes is that, well, actually if we don't put what's called an access modifier, something like private or public or so on and so forth, before this, we'd be able to access it and modify it from outside of the class. Now, actually, there are certain rules that apply to modules at University of Chester. One is which, once it's created, you can't change the title, and therefore you can't change the code, because if you could change the code, you could assign the title that exists to something that already exists. So these shouldn't be changed. And actually, in programming in Java, the sort of convention is to keep all of these are called fields or instance variables. So this is a field or instance variable. The convention is to make these all private by default, and then decide through careful consideration how we want these to be able to be accessed. It might be that we want to be able to read them but not write them. It might be occasionally we want to write them, not read them. It might be we want to be able to read and write them. Okay, so that sort of sets up our class, but without the ability to read and write from elsewhere, all we'd be able to do is to create a module and do nothing with it. So if I jump back to the main class, I could say something like module, and you'll see it pops it up. Now there's also a class called module that belongs in java.lang. Okay, so we just make sure we use the right one. If we did this, it would import java.lang and things would get a bit confusing. And if we wanted to differentiate, we could say java.lang.module. We're in the same package, so we just get module out of the box as it is. So we could say programming 1 is equal to new module. Okay, but I can't do anything with that. I've got programming 1 dot. Okay, there's some things that are built in to any class that we create, because all of our classes in Java inherit, as in they're derived from, they have the properties of something called object, and that has some built-in functionality that lets you compare it to, say, another object, and for example get a string representation of it. And we get default behavior for those unless we actually try and change those behaviors, but we'll come on to that in a later class. So I can't get to, I can't get the name of the module or the title. But at the moment, I don't even, we create a new module, but it doesn't know, I've got a variable that says it's programming 1, but the module doesn't know it's programming 1, doesn't know what the module code is, it doesn't know how many credits it is, okay? So what we might do is we might go back and we might look at our module again and say, well, okay, we need some way of deciding that when we create a module, we must give it a name and or a title and a code. Okay, the credits we could maybe think about. Well, we could give it a default value of 20 and allow it to be potentially set up in a different way. So what we'll do, we'll leave credits as 20 for now and actually give it a value, because in most circumstances a module at the university is 20 credits. Okay, and then. But we need a way of setting up the code and title. And really we want to do that because we can't change them. We don't want someone creating a module and then setting the title and then setting it to something else. Okay, so we want to have a way of constructing the module whereby we make sure it has a code and a title. Okay, and the way we do that is by creating something called a constructor. So the syntax for constructor goes inside our class, and it's a little bit like a method, except that instead of having it a name, the name of it is actually the name of the class. Okay. Now we want our constructor to be accessible from everywhere, this particular one at least, from everywhere we create our module. So we need to use the keyword public. Okay. And as I said, it's like a method, but actually the method name matches the class. Okay. Now the other thing you'll have noticed is the class has a capital letter, and that's a convention for classes in Java, whereas methods we use lower camel case. So the constructor for a module is public module. Okay, and it has parameters just like anything else. So the parameters for a module that we definitely want to make sure are provided are the code and the title. So we can say string code, string title, and then we write the method of the constructor. Okay, now you might then think, well, okay, this is getting a bit confusing because we've got code here and code here. Okay, so how on earth is that going to work? Well, actually, we have a way of differentiating between something with the same name that exists as a parameter and something that exists inside the class. Okay, if we want to access the one that belongs to the class, we can prefix it with the keyword this. So if I say this dot code, you'll see that it lights up and it's lit up in purple. Okay, and if obviously using a dark theme, you might have a slightly different color. But you can see when I click on it, it highlights here and it highlights here. And I can assign this field the value of this parameter. Okay. And you'll notice this one is black. When I hover on it, that lights up. And this is purple. When I hover it, that lights up. Okay. So this is not lit up. That's just yellow because it's going to be a warning about something else. And the same goes for title. So I can say this dot title equals title. So it assigns the value from the parameter to the module. Okay. So I can now create a module. Okay. We still can't use the value. So let's go back to our main class. Okay. You'll see we've now got an error here because when we tried to create our module before, it didn't require any information to get started. But now we're saying you can't create a module unless you provide it with the parameters that are needed. And if we were to retype the brace, it'd pop up and say the first thing you need is a code. Okay, well this module is CO4225, and we need a title which is programming 1. Okay, so that's all well and good. That now creates a module. Okay, and the module has, apart from the fact I can't spell programming, a code and a title, and we've decided that by default credits has got a value of 20. Okay, we probably want to come back to this and say work out how this can be set to a different value. Okay, so we'll leave that as a to-do to come and fix it. Well, that's all well and good. The next thing one is we can't actually read those values back out of it. Okay, so there, at the moment, if I say, say I wanted to print the title of the module or assign it to a variable, let's say I want to assign it to a variable, I could say module title equals programming 1 dot, and really I want something that allows me to get the title. Okay, but if I type title, nothing comes up. If I type get, forget title, it doesn't give me an option to get title. So we're not, it's not very usable still. We can create it, but we can't get those values. So what we have to do is to create what is called an accessor. Okay, and an accessor allows us to get any given value. Okay, so at the moment these are private. These are what are called encapsulated within our class. And we want to say, well, okay, we want people to be able to read these values. Okay, so we could create an accessor. An accessor is also known as a getter, and you'll see why in Java the convention is to make a method with the name or prefix with the word get that gets the field. Okay, so we just write a regular method. Now, to date we've been writing static methods, but this method actually belongs to and makes use of the values of this module, or of any given module. When we create a module, whatever value is stored in code and title. So we don't want to use the static keyword here. We do want to make it public. We want to make sure that anybody can use the method. Okay, and as I said, the convention is to say get, and it knows, IntelliJ is intelligent, it knows that we might want to be able to get the values, and it's saying, well, okay, you're probably wanting to create a method called get code or get title or get credits. Okay, we could click this and it will actually write all of the code that does that for us. Okay, but I'm going to do it manually and talk you through it. I'll do it manually for get code and then we'll let it do it for get title. So we'll say get code. Okay, I haven't put a return type in, so I really want to say string because code is a string. And then I can write the body of the method, and all it's going to do is dead simple, is return the code. Okay, so that's great. I can go back to my main method. I was doing not title, I was doing code, so we'll call it module code, and we can say that's equal to programming1 dot get code. And if I was to print that out, we should see 4225 printed out. So let's just run that and see that happen. There we go, that's working. So as I said, we can do the same if we want to be able to read the value of our title. Okay, so if I start typing get title, I can click on that and it'll put it all in for me. It's done all the work for me. Okay, now we can't change those values, so we don't really want any way of setting them. But the other thing that's often associated with the module is a tutor. Okay, so I'm teaching this module. So what we might do is come along and say, well, okay, let's store tutor name. Okay, so we might say, again, we want to create a private field. We'll say private string tutor name. Okay, and then we might want to have both a way of getting it, but also a way of setting it. Okay, so at the moment we don't currently set up a module with a tutor. Okay, and this is where we have to think about how the system works. Okay, the question we would ask is it possible for a module to exist without a tutor? Okay, well, certainly one can be developed. There can be a module descriptor for it. You know, if I went under a bus tomorrow, then there would be a short time, hopefully not too short, but a short time while you wouldn't have a tutor for the module. So we could say, well, okay, we don't force the constructor to specify the tutor name. Okay, and we might, and certainly a tutor can change. You know, we can change a tutor for a module. So we certainly don't want to be able to change it. So as well as writing a method that gets the tutor, okay, get tutor name, we also might want one to set tutor name. Okay, this is a little bit more involved, but not much. Okay, again, we'd say public. We don't return anything when we set it, so it would be a void. And the convention here is to say set, and you can see it's popping up set tutor name. Okay, now when we set the tutor name, we need a string to be passed in to store that tutor name. Okay, so we would say string tutor name. We don't have to use the exact same name as the field has. So I could here use name. Okay, if it's not the same, I can use tutor name without the self prefix. Okay, sorry, without the this prefix, but I'm going to use it anyway. I'm going to say tutor name equals name. Okay, but it's perfectly fine to use tutor name here and there, and it's probably better to stick to one convention rather than jumping between them. Okay, and in fact, because I've said it's better to stick to one convention, I'm going to do that. I'm going to say tutor name here and use tutor name there. So we can now create a module. We can't change the title or the code because that's not allowed, and that's what we want. We can get and set the tutor name. Okay, and the other thing I said we could do, well, actually, the level of module can be calculated. So we're obviously not going to be able to change level of module. You know, you can't change a module code, you can't change its level. So we could write a method to do that. We could say public int get level, and it's not suggesting get level because it doesn't know that the level is actually part of the name of the module. So we could say public int get level. Okay, and what we need to do is to extract the level from the module code. Okay, so we could get the char. We could say char level char equals, and then we've got the code dot get char which is char at, isn't it? There we go, char at, and it will be if we think it's CF45, 1, 2, 3, so the third position, so index 2. Okay, and what we need to do is then to convert that into an integer. Okay, so we could say something like integer dot value of. Okay, now actually it requires a string, so we could kind of cheat, or we could see if we made this a character, whether it has an int value. That might be another way of doing it. Let's see if we can do that. We could see if level char, does it have an int value? It doesn't have an int value. Okay, so we'll have to go back to the original approach, which is to store it as a char, and then we can say integer dot value of and we could pass in a string. We can make a string by doing that plus level char, or we can make a string by saying, for example, string dot value of, and pass in the char. That's probably a slightly nice approach, even if it's slightly more code. Okay, so we're turning the string character into a string and turning that into an integer, and then we need to assign that to an int. So we could say int level. Okay, and then we could return level. Okay, now you might have noticed we only use this variable once, so actually we might as well just put return here and do that, and that's a bit nicer. And let's just see what it's warning us, because it might be oh, it's suggesting that we could use parseInt instead, which is probably a better approach. If we do that, you can see it's changing it to give us parseInt provides an int instead of an integer type. So this is a slightly nicer approach. So we could probably should test that. Okay, we could even write a unit test for it, but we're not doing unit testing today. But you could, generate a test, and then you could create an instance of the module. You could set some different module codes and check that level's right. But we'll do it manually to start with. So we'll go here. We've created 4225. We'll say int level equals programming1 dot get level, and then we'll print out the level and just check that it's level 4. And there we go. It's working. Okay, so I guess we've got the most part of a class working. We can get the level, we can get the tutor name, we can get the title. We haven't really, well, one, we haven't got a thing to get the credits, so we probably want to add on to get the credits. So public int get credits, okay, and we could return credits. Okay. Now, in terms of setting the credits, we can't change the credits for a module after it's created. That would cause all sorts of problems if you change the credits and then issued a transcript for someone who'd been there in the past and you got the current number of credits. That could be confusing. But we might want a way of making sure that when a module is created, the credits are set. Now, we could add credits to this constructor. Okay, but given that most modules have a value of 20 credits, it's going to give us more work to do when, it's the, I have put common 10 or 20, but it's far less common. I'd expect probably less than 10% of modules to have something other than 20 credits. So we can actually create another constructor to do that. Okay, that takes the same format, has exactly the same name. So we could say public module, okay, and then the we still want the code, we still want the title, okay, and the convention is where they're similar, you put those ones first, but we also want to say in credits. Okay, and what we can do, okay, is we can then populate the credits. So we can say credits, or this dot credits equals credits. Now we could just replicate this functionality here, okay, but because that functionality is there, we could just call this constructor. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we can just say this, because that calls the constructor. We can pass in the code and the title. Okay, so that will construct the class and set the credits. Okay, we could have copied and pasted that in here, but it's just duplicate code. Okay, so let's go back and create another module. So we've got our programming 1 module. That constructor still works, and then we might create let's create the innovation project, which is a level 6 project. We can say that's a new module, and the module code for that is CO6008. The title is innovation project. Oops. And that is a 40 credit module. Okay, so if we then wanted to, check that, I put the wrong code there. It should be 6008. I don't quite know how I messed that one up. So we could say something like int innovation project credits equals innovation project dot get credits. Print that out just to check that we get the value of 40. It does, and we can see that everything else is working. So we could, for example, get the, in fact, we can actually get the value and print it directly. So we might say innovation project dot level, get level, and check that that comes out at level 6, which it does. Okay, so just to recap, okay, we have our fields. Okay, so let's say these are fields. Let's make this a little bit more obvious. Okay, these are all our fields. Okay, these, we've done that, constructed. These are our constructors. Quite often we'll only just need the one constructor. Okay, here are our accessors, also known as getters. And we'll just move this around. You don't have to put them in any particular order, but I didn't actually tell you what they're called. Okay, you might have guessed that the sort of they can be called setters, which they can, but the sort of I don't know. The other term that's used that sort of matches with accessor is mutator. Okay, also known as setters, except we've only got one. So here the encapsulation is quite important because we are not allowing people to mess around with most of these. We can change the tutor name. Okay, we can't change the credits after we construct it. If we use this constructor, the credits will be set at 20. If we use this one, we can set the credit number ourselves. Okay, there's nothing to stop us adding yet another constructor that lets us, for example, specify the name of the tutor if we wanted to. But it's possible that the tutor could be null. And that's the other thing that's worth mentioning. Okay, in this particular example, tutor name, when we create a module, is null. Okay, that could cause us a problem. So for example, let's just simplify it and let's say something like string tutor equals programming1 dot get tutor name. Okay, now if I just try and print that, we'll probably be okay. We'll just get an output that's null. Okay, that's null. It means we've not set a value. If I wanted to get my initial, so if I wanted to say like char tutor initial equals tutor dot char at 0, and print that out, and it will error before we get to this point, we end up with a problem. Okay, and this is a problem that is particular to a lot of languages. Okay, and the error we've got here is called a null pointer exception. It basically means we've tried to access something. In this case, we've tried to access the character in a string that is null. It doesn't exist. Okay, so a good rule of thumb when you're creating a class is to try wherever possible to avoid reaching a state where something like this could be null. Okay, now other language, it's not always possible. Okay, and there are, you know, as I said before, it's possible that there won't be a tutor for the module. Okay, and we could address this in some way. We could either say, yeah, fine, we'll leave it as null, and we'll expect the developer to check it's not null before they use it. In other languages, there are special ways of representing data that could be null, and that forces us to check, but we don't have that in an easy to use format in Java. If you want to do some reading on the subject, you could look for something called an optional in Java, but it's not particularly easy to use and it's not commonly used. Okay, so we need to be aware of this. We might add a maybe null, for example. Okay, there are special ways of writing comments that sort of make it more obvious in the IDE that it's null, but that's probably a little bit out of scope for today. So typically, wherever possible, you want to provide a way to ensure that all your fields have got values when you start. Okay, it's not always possible, but as you can see from here, we might not have a tutor, and yeah, we would need to think about. Well, we won't do much about that at this stage. We've then got our constructors. We're providing 2 ways to set it up. Okay. The other thing you could do, I've declared credits of 20 there, but what we might do instead to make it more obvious is we could say, well, if we use this one, this dot credits equals 20. Okay. And that makes it clearer maybe that when you create a module using this approach, credits are set to 20. Okay, we can get rid of that to do there. We've then got our accessors, so we're saying it's perfectly acceptable to read the code, the title, the name, and the level, and the credits, so pretty much everything. Now obviously, get level is actually a calculation. It's an operation rather than just a getter. So maybe we'd take that out of the getters. We could just say methods. That's probably more accurate. And then we've got one field that we can change, and that's the tutor name. Okay, and all of those are now available. If we create a module, we can look at program 1. We've got our get all of those things, and we've got our setter. And that is a basic. There's quite a lot more you can do with classes, but that's a basic introduction.